coming. My name is Alex. I'm the chief scientific archivist in this parks. We're one of the film partners of the National Collectors and the Southeastern District Inquiry. The community for coming to celebrate the 60th anniversary of today. We got a great presentation from Island in the Sky District Ranger Jessi Carver. Yeah, right. Okay. It's going to talk a little bit about the amazing story about two women that ran the Clover River. So I'll let her talk more than me. So go ahead and introduce Jessi Carver. Today, someone do them.
And one of the things I'm excited for this afternoon is being with friends. Literally the friends of Canyonlands and Arches, and you all here as friends as part of that group. So like Alex said, my name is Ranger Jessi. I've been up at Island in the Sky for 2 seasons. I don't have a historic, like a science background, but I fell in love with this story in particular. If anyone's at the Moab Library last year, you may have seen the author of this book give this presentation, and I actually gave this presentation at the museum last year as well. So if you're here for the 3rd time, you can get a prize for leaving. Decide what that is. It's probably ice cream at the event. But one of the things I love about telling this story, especially Island in the Sky, is part of this story happens in what would be the future Canyonlands National Park. So this tale of Elzada, Clover, and Lois, Jotter, we're going to jump into that, but just know if you were to go up to Island in the Sky, the Green River Overlook, you could see part of that track that they would vet on their journey. I'm getting a little help with my PowerPoint, so it's going to be a little clunky as I'm going to get Jared's spot. All right, this story starts back in the 1930s. Anybody know anything about the United States in the 1930s? That's right. The Depression, exactly. So the Depression was hitting the United States and the global economy pretty hard. And our 2 women, Elzada, Clover, and Lois, Jotter, were botanists during that time. So anyone have an idea what botanists may have been experiencing in the 1930s? Yeah, exactly, right? A pretty difficult time for the study of science and botanical science within that depression. Now, what's unique about the particular study of botany, and our women in it, is earlier, women have been encouraged to do botany. They've been encouraged to go out and find flowers and identify those flowers and catalog them. They thought it was a good way for women to take a nice stroll through a field and participate in the botanical sciences that way. But in the 30s, along with the Depression, botany was becoming more like lab science. So in that push towards the lab science, out of kind of field work and more under a microscope and looking at the specific details to try and catalog plants, because the Depression is compounding this factor, a lot of those lab jobs were not really to women. And so in that kind of change in the botanical field, but also that push of women out of the workforce as men were taking those jobs in that laboratory science, we were being pushed out. Now, it's really fun to think about botanical sciences for women in that earlier time, really focused around like flowers and nice plants. But Lois and Elzada were specifically looking at something else. Go ahead and that next one. Elzada had a fascination with cactus. Now, collecting cactus is very different than collecting flowers, right? The flowers often smell nice and you can touch them, it's pretty. Cactus want to hurt you, they don't want to be touched. They're spiny and prickly, and Elzada loved them. She grew up in Nebraska, and in 1937, when we started this journey, she was an instructor at the University of Michigan. She was not a professor. Professors were not allowed to be women at that time in university, but she was an instructor. And during that time, she was facing some of that squeeze in that science in the 30s. The Department of the Botany, the chair of the Botany department would often put Elzada up for promotion through the university or other avenues, and he would write in his own journal that Elzada isn't wanted because she is a woman. Although she has been unusually successful as a teacher of the younger students, and we need her precisely for that. And a couple times when he put her up for promotion, he literally got back the reply, "I would prefer a man." So it's pretty hard spot for Elzada to be, and her love of the botanical sciences in the 30s. And so in 1937, she was on a self-funded botanical trip in between semesters, so that summer season, from the University of Michigan down to Mexican Hat, Utah. Let's see what that next slide says. Perfect. Mexican Hat sits about right here. Here's the Moab Museum. Canyonlands here. And down in Mexican Hat, Utah, she met Norm Nevels. And Norm had a kind of lodge, Airbnb type situation, bed and breakfast, you might say. And not much happens in Mexican Hat, Utah at that time. That might be true a little bit today too. But Norm was a river runner on that San Juan River. And he wanted to become a commercial river runner. He thought that there would be money and a professional career and be able to run the Colorado River commercially. One night over dinner, Elzada and Norm were talking about Elzada's aspirations as she's on this self-funded trip to collect up cactus. And she lets Norm know that she wants to go into the Grand Canyon. And to date, to 1937, nobody had done a complete collection of plants or complete cataloging of plants through the Grand Canyon. So her plan was to take mules down that Bright Angel Trail and collect botanical samples along the way. Now Norm clicks in his head pretty quickly that this is an opportunity to maybe kick off that river running commercial practice. So he and Elzada over dinner quickly come up with a plan that instead of taking mules down Grand Canyon, they should take boats. And they should take a boat trip all the way from Green River, Utah, down to Boulder City, Nevada, where the Boulder Dam had just was built, now called the Hoover Dam, a couple of years before. Elzada was quite the adventurer, so she quickly latched onto this idea. They had to do a couple of different things to get ready for that, but the plan was the next year to take on that trip. Let's see what that next slide looks just like.
Beautiful. Oh.
Perfect. Yep, we'll start up seat. Okay, so a couple things that had happened in order to get this trip going. Norm, the commercial river runner, did not have boats to do it, and so he had to construct the boats. These are see a picture of one of those boats. Norm built those 3 boats: the WEN, which is the initials of his father, the Botany, because that was the focus of this trip, and the Mexican Hat, as that was Norm's hometown there. He built these 3 boats in a workshop that had no power, and so all of it was hand done. It's not the first time he built boats, but this was the first of this design. He called them hat-racked boats. The other thing Norm needed to do was get a couple other oarsmen. He was going to row one of the boats. He needed a couple more to row the boats as well. On Elzada's side, let's go to the next slide to see what the team looks like.
Perfect.
On Elzada's side, she needed to fill out the rest of the expedition with a scientist. So herself as a botanist, she was going to invite another graduate student, Gene, who was a zoologist at the University of Michigan. He wanted to join the expedition for the adventure, but also to potentially do some hunting and trapping, collect some animal specimens that he could take back and sell, maybe make a little bit of money off of that. But because it was the 30s, Elzada also recognized she would not be welcome to take this trip as a single woman with a group of men. And so she writes in her journal, "I feel guilty asking any other woman to share the physical and mental punishment which would be ours." But she had someone in mind. A few years prior, she had met the Lois Jotter. So Lois is here in this picture. Lois is a PhD student studying the primrose. She since 1937, so when Elzada was in Mexican Hat, Lois was part of the naturalist training program with the National Park System in Yosemite. Lois didn't consider herself much of an adventurer, except when she got asked to take this trip, she jumped right on it. She says to her parents, and trying to ask permission, she's a 24-year-old PhD student, but she still needed permission from her parents at that time, and she needed a little money to help fund the trip as well. And so she asks her parents in a letter for that permission, that money, and she says to them, "I know that I'm not getting into any lark, but you know it'll be something I'll always regret not doing if I don't." Now, in true small world situation of a university science department in the 30s, Elzada and Lois had actually been roommates a couple of years before because there were so few women in the sciences departments. So they knew that they could tolerate each other. They knew that they were compatible enough to take on this adventure together. One of the things about this team is a bunch of like 20-somethings, and then a few older folks as well. So older folks being in their 40s, so still pretty young folk. Norm is in his 30s, Elzada in her 40s. She's maybe the oldest on the trip until a little bit later on. And so that rounds out our 6 folks that are going to start this trip. 3 boatmen, 3 scientists.
Excellent.
All right. Now, one of the things that's important to note about the story and about life is pretty much the one consistent thing I found in life is change, right? And so the river is an excellent example of a consistent change. The river's always changing. But this story, we're going to talk about change beyond just the river. And so as our women are getting ready to go on their journey, we have some press coverage. The Michigan Daily picks up the story and says, faculty women to face danger on the stormy Colorado for science. As that headline crosses the country, the Salt Lake Telegram picks it up and says, for fame, for glory, for thrill, or for swell obituaries, they are going down the river. Now, the swell obituaries part is because up until this point, it's still a very dangerous river even today. And up to this point, there have only been about a dozen expeditions since John Wesley Powell's expedition. That was in 69 years earlier than this one, 1869. And they knew very front of mind the dangers that were coming. One of the other contributing factors of that is in 1937, Buzz Holmstrom was the first non-native man to take that trip from Green River, Wyoming, all the way down through to Lake Mead solo. And he was interviewed at the Saturday Evening Post, and his story was out everywhere. And everybody heard how dangerous, harrowing, treacherous, dangerous the river was for Buzz to take that trip, right? In particular, as Lois is asking her parents for permission, they're reading about this trip that Buzz had done solo the year before. And so, front of mind for them was this potential treachery. And Elzada writes about it, saying, each moment might easily have been our last, but fortunately, we were too busy to meditate upon our imminent, untimely end. And she notes when she asked Lois that Lois's parents had no spare daughters. And so it was a big decision for them to take this on. Yeah. All right, as that press continues to tell these stories, we've got the Associated Press, which includes in their story that the women, besides doing their scientific work, will do the cooking. So in those previous dozen or so trips of only non-native men to go down, I'm not sure how they ate, but on this trip, we don't know the thing. All right. Finally, we're going to start our days on June 20th in Green River, Utah. Green River, Utah is upstream of the Green River from here on Interstate 70. This is the launch point for our team. Norm has put his 3 boats, get his orange ribbons together, carries them up on the back of a trailer to Green River, Utah. It takes the university team a week to drive from Michigan all the way out here to Green River. They are getting all their gear together. They spend a couple days together before their launch date. The first time the boats touch water is here at Green River, Utah. And so really putting a lot of trust in that design. And on that launch date, the Associated Press writes 2 flora-minded women from Michigan join 4 equally adventurous men today in a daring boat trip down the restless Colorado River's Mountain Gorge in quest of nature's secrets. Now, as the team had been putting this all together, the journalists are filling pages and not always having a lot to fill those pages with because the team wasn't quite doing interviews ahead of time. So they asked Buzz Holmstrom, the man who'd gone down the river the year before, what he thought about the women going on this trip. And Buzz says to the press that women have their place in the world, but they do not belong in the Canyon of the Colorado. And so on their launch date, that has been across the news, and the journalists who were covering their launch asked the women, what do you think of the Riverman's statement in the Saturday Evening Post? And Lois replies, just because the only other woman who has ever attempted this trip was drowned is no reason women have any more to fear than men. Now, the woman she's talking about 10 years prior, 1928, Bessie Hyde and her new husband, Glenn, were on their honeymoon trip. They decided to take boats down the Grand Canyon on their honeymoon, and they did not make it out. And so we do not know what happened to them. Their boat was found. It had all their supplies. It was undisturbed. But neither Jessi or Glenn was ever seen again. Right. Neither of them then. Right. And so, again, front of mind, how dangerous the detention trip is going to be. All right. June 20th. Let's see what's on next on our slide there. Great. They put it on June 20th at Green River. They get all that press coverage. They actually pull over a little bit later and kind of like resituate themselves after the press has left them alone. And then they spend 3 days going down the Green River. Between Green River, Utah, and the confluence inside Canyonlands National Park where the Green and Colorado meet. Does anybody know anything about the Green River through there?
It's amazing.
It is amazing. It's amazing. There it is. Yes. Flat water, right? They're not getting rapids through there. They're just kind of leisurely heading down the river, which is okay for our team. They have brand new boats, new oarsmen. They don't really know each other. And so they're spending that first 3 days really kind of putting the team together, seeing how this is going to work. And it isn't until 3 days later, on June 23rd, where they are sitting upstream now of Cataract Canyon. Does anybody know anything about Cataract Canyon? Yeah. It is not still water. Yes. Even today, it is a dangerous, potentially dangerous trip going through Cataract Canyon. So on the night before they hit that Cataract Canyon and their first rapids of the trip, Norm pulls the team together. He gives them the safety speech. Has anyone heard of those boater safety speeches before? If this happens, then this, be wearing this, have your gear this way, hit the rapids this way, all of that. And Lois, as the scientist on the trip and not the oarsman, says in her journal, I guess I really must not have listened to any of this with a sense of responsibility. And so she kind of puts the safety speech aside, and as they're getting ready to go down Cataract Canyon, as good river runners still do, our team has tied up their boats, and they're hiking down the canyon to scout the rapids. They're looking for the eddies, for the big waves, for the big dips, the holes, all those pieces of big rocks to avoid. And as they're down canyon, scouting those rapids, super important thing that they see go down the river is the Mexican hat, the boat, with no one in it, reported their supplies, pretty early in the trip. Lois and her oarsmen are the first back to their boat. They jump in. Oarsman asks her, does she want to go? She says, of course. He says, we're going to run them. And they run 5 miles of Cataract Canyon, having not scouted those rapids before, having not been on those rapids before. Lois is bailing out the boat with a coffee can, cuts her hand on that coffee can. But each time they find a little eddy to rest in, he asks if she wants to get out, and she says no. She's going to keep going with them. Now they're just about done trying to search for the Mexican hat, the boat in front of them. When they finally turn a bend, and it's beached itself on a sandbar. And they're overjoyed to have their boat and their supplies in good repair. And they collect themselves up on that sandbar, and the oarsman decides he needs to go back and tell everybody else what's going on. Now, if y'all been on the river now, you know we've got radios, right? We radio back and forth where people are, keep that kind of open communication. In 1938, they did have radios, and radios were on the equipment list, but radios did not make it into the boats. So they did not have communication with each other if it was not line of sight. And if you've been down around those river rapids, it's loud. So even trying to holler over them would have been pretty impossible. And so now Lois and Hours were 5 miles down the canyon, and the folks waiting up top, upstream from them, do not know if they're okay. They've got 2 boats downstream. They've got members of their team downstream, and it's pretty worrisome time for them. As the oarsman hikes that 5 miles back up to the rest of the crew, they're overjoyed to see him. He's on the wrong side of the river, so they can actually get in the boat and come across the river to meet him. But they craft a plan that 2 of them are going to take a flashlight, hike back down to Lois, and then they're going to rejoin the next day. Well, the 2 of them with a flashlight overestimate the strength of their flashlight and underestimate how much light they have left, and find it pretty difficult to navigate down to Lois and don't make it that night. So they spent a pretty cold, tired, hungry night on the side of the canyon on a rock, just sussing it out through the night, or working it out through the night. The team upstream has one of the boats but doesn't really have the cooking utensils in it, doesn't have the food in it, not any of the good beddings in it, and so they are also spending a pretty cold, tired, hungry night upstream. But Lois has 2 boats, all the bedrolls, all the food, starts herself a fire, and writes in her journal, "I felt quite alone, and I had a lovely time." And so after a first day of running rapids, pretty treacherous situation, the next day all of our team gets back together. And now Norm, as leader of this expedition, is pretty shooken up. He's pretty, that first day did not go well for him. And he's got his commercial river rapids running in his mind. And he knows if he can't get these women through this trip safely, no one's ever going to pay him to take him down again, right? And so Norm decides he's going to take the cautious route around the next set of rapids. They're only partway through Cataract Canyon. There's a lot of big rapids left to go, just in that section of the river. And so Norm decides they're going to sometimes portage the boats. So take all the equipment out, haul it down the canyon around the rapids, carry the boats around. Sometimes they'll line the boats, put ropes on them, walk around those. Sometimes Norm feels he's the only one that can get them through those rapids. And so he individually runs the boats through, walks back up, runs the next boat through, walks back up, while the rest of the team is going down the Mead and downstream. It's laborious. It's taking a lot of time. The women are doing their scientific work as they're hiking through. They're collecting the botanical samples. They're doing their journaling and the recording of the species. Of course, they're doing the cooking as well as they're going through. But it's taking a lot of time. I think we go to the next slide. Perfect. Our team is due in Lee's Ferry, about the halfway point, about 300 river miles down from Green River, on July 4th. The press is there, waiting for them. Lois had told her roommate back in Michigan to expect them in Lee's Ferry about July 4th, but not to panic if they didn't get there. Now, she says to her roommate not to panic, but Lois, before she left, had actually packed up her stuff with who it should go to if she didn't. So I'm not sure who's panicking more. But on July 4th, nobody comes into Lee's Ferry. On July 5th, nobody. July 6th, the press is now restless. They have nothing to write about, except that the team is not there. And so they go back to Buzz. And they ask Buzz what he thinks about the team coming in late to Lee's Ferry. And Buzz says, "I'm glad I'm not on that trip, but I certainly hope they do get through all right." And then Buzz puts his own boat on a truck and hauls it up to Green River and decides if there's going to be a rescue, he's going to be the one to do it. On the 7th, no one's coming in, and at this point, they have employed the Coast Guard to try and find the team. Now, if the Coast Guard flew over the river right now, they'd see lots of different boating cruises, right? 1938, they're the only ones out there. And so the Coast Guard's flying their plane up the Colorado River. And I don't believe we do this anymore, but the plan was if they saw the team, they had printed a stack of flyers, and they were going to throw the flyers out the window and let them flutter down to the team so that they could get the information they were trying to give to them. And so as they spotted that team, they dipped low, threw the flyers out the window, all down the canyon, littered flyers everywhere. A couple of them go up to climb a tree to try to get one, go up to the canyon to try to get one, but one actually lands right by camp. And so Lois and the other oarsman who's down at camp with her pick up this flyer, and it says, "We are U.S. Coast Guard plane, searching for a party of 6 U of Michigan geologists, reportedly late at Lee's Ferry." Now, the women were not geologists, they were botanists, and they cared a lot that they were identified as botanists. They didn't love that part of the flyer. But it says, "If you are they, lie down all in a row and then stand up. If in need of food, sit up. If members of the party are all okay, extend arms horizontally. It is imperative that we know who you are, so identify yourself by signal first." Now, could anybody relay the message? Not quite, right? And so they had a little laugh about it, and they did the gymnastics required to relay up to the plane that they were okay, they had their food, the plane dipped its wings and went off and let the folks know at Lee's Ferry that they'd be coming in. On July 8th, our team makes it into Lee's Ferry. The press has been there for days waiting for them, but the press is not ready for their arrival. And so they actually had to convince our team to stage their arrival a second time so that they could get pictures of them coming into Lee's Ferry. Now, Lee's Ferry is about a halfway point. It was the first place that they had planned to drop off their botanical samples and have them mailed back to Michigan so they wouldn't risk losing them if they had taken them on farther. And they'd already planned a week layover at Lee's Ferry. They needed new supplies. They needed a shower, they needed to be off the river for a little bit. And of course, as the press is covering their arrival, they write, "Adventurers arrived safely after death-defying trip. Food supplies exhausted after fighting 300 miles of wild Colorado River." And of course, the story gets out of their first day through Cataract Canyon, and the headline runs, "Girl Left Alone," about Lois's night on the side of the river and at the 5 miles down in Cataract Canyon. Now, Lois, having seen the headlines, writes to her friend, "My dear, don't believe anything you do see that is supposed to be something we've said, because we've been beautifully misquoted out here. At no time was I cold, unfed, nor did I hear animals growling from the rim. Really, most of this stuff written has been absurd and so wrong that the only right thing was the dateline." So a couple important things happen there at Lee's Ferry. One is 2 members of our team actually get replaced. One of our team members was working for U.S. Geological Survey and had a job lined up for after the trip, but was worried that their delay and any future delays would make it so he could get to his job on time. So he departed the trip early at Lee's Ferry and went on to work. The other person that left the team was the other graduate student, the zoologist. He was uninvited to the second trip. He was kind of a bummer and making everybody real cranky, and so he was not asked to join them for the second part. And it was sent home early, essentially. But that meant we needed 2 more people, otherwise the trip was going to fall apart here at Lee's Ferry. And so in that week-long layover, Norm and Elzada borrowed a truck, take it back to Mexican Hat, where Norm knows some folks, right? He has a friend that can join the party. He gets them in the truck with them. And then he's got a friend with a cousin who knows a guy who says he's over there. And they actually find him sleeping in his bed, and they wake him up. And they say, "Do you want to run the river?" And he says, "Hell yes." "Which river?" And so he's game right from being woken up from sleep to join that team. So Norm and Elzada take that week, and they start heading back to Lee's Ferry. Now, the other thing that happens, as far as we're talking about change, is Buzz Holmstrom gets word that the team has made it in safely. And you remember he had staged his boat up at Green River and comes down and decides he's going to meet the party that's going on this trip. And so, sorry I don't have this on the PowerPoint, but this is a picture of Buzz and Lois. They spend about a week together. They spend about a day and a half together. Buzz shares stories of what he has seen on his trip, what they can anticipate coming ahead of them. Lois tells of the things that they've seen so far, her anxieties and concerns about what's coming up. She will admit to complaining a little bit about some of the conditions of their trip so far. And in this picture, Buzz is actually giving Lois a waterproof match carrier that he had taken on his solo trip, and he's giving to her to take as a memento on the rest of her trip. Now, after that day and a half, Buzz writes to his mom to let her know that the women on this party are really doing better than the men. This Lois is almost 6 feet tall, which she was not. She was 5'7", but she was taller than Buzz, and so it's important for him to. She's raw-boned, freckled, and tan, very strong, works like a horse, helping portage and getting specimens, and a good sport, never complaining. Which is interesting because Lois had said that she complained to him a little bit, but he did go through that part. Now, at Lee's Ferry, so we got our 2 folks, we've got our meeting up with Buzz, we've got that handoff of the memento for Lois from Buzz. And if you go to the next slide, our team, here's Buzz. Our team puts back into the river on July 13th, so about a week later. The morale of the team has improved significantly with the 2 new folks on their squad. And the rest of the story is going through the Grand Canyon. And now, when I tell this program up at Canyonlands, I don't include the parts of the story in the Grand Canyon, because that's a different park and they can tell their own stories in their own park. But I'll tell you a couple different things on this journey through the Grand Canyon. If you go through the next slide. A couple days later, our team gets down to Phantom Ranch, down at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Bright Angel Trail takes you down to Phantom Ranch. They meet up with some other folks there, take pictures, all sorts of great things. But this really important stretch right through here, between the 13th and the 18th, the women are collecting a lot of botanical sequels. We talked about like shouldn't say that, prickly, pokey, cactus that are gonna hurt you if you try to get too close to them, right? And they're putting them in these botanical presses, handmade presses, so cardboard, paper, parchment paper, plant, parchment paper, another plant, parchment paper, another plant, pressing it all together to get those specimens. Now, if you think about what a cactus looks like, this is not like a great situation, right? Especially if you're collecting things like feral cactus, fish hook cactus, even the prickly pear are still pretty fleshy material, right? And so the women, as they collect it, they're actually slicing it open, taking out kind of the guts from the inside, trying to preserve the outer parts, helping them identify it, and getting those pressed on top of each other. They knew, like they had done at least 30, they didn't want to carry their whole collection with them, so at Phantom Ranch, they also dropped off part of their press there as well. A couple cool things that happened in that stretch of time. They go to Vassie's Paradise, which was named for a botanist, even though botanists haven't been there. But it was a pretty famous hanging garden space that they were particularly interested in getting specimens from. Part of that hanging garden was a lot of poison ivy. And they didn't collect that, but they collected things all around that. And it was one of the few times that they really stalled the expedition to do the scientific collecting. And they started early in the morning. They'd come into the camp the night before, started early in the morning, headed up into the side of the canyons. Now, if you hike down in the canyons, this isn't a path, there's no trail. They're just going for it up the canyon sides. The men are all back at the camp and are starting to get hungry, a little cranky. And so as the women come back, they have no plans to stop their collections, and they tell the men, get out the food and make yourselves lunch. They go back up to collect more plants, and as they come back with more to put into their collection, the men are just still sitting there, pretty hungry and cranky, and not made any food. And so Lois and Elzada are a little perturbed by that. And in one of the few times, Elzada complains a little bit in her journal. She writes about this and the men not making their own lunch that day, and says, "We have spoiled them completely." And so they stop their collecting, they make their lunch, everyone's fed, they do the rest, and then they head on their way through there. Now there's another story in that little section of time where Lois is out collecting specimens after they've been through the river all day. She finds a huge agave plant, and it's got a like 12-foot tall stalk, thank you, with the flowers at the top. It's a very impressive specimen. And she thinks she's found a brand new type of specimen, because on this particular agave plant, there was red going down the leaves, and she had not seen that before. And it took her a minute, as she was trying to see how she's going to collect this up, to recognize the red coming down those leaves was her own blood. Yeah. She had, out collecting those plants, she cut her hands enough without even recognizing it, that red was her own contribution, she said, to that plant. So, all right, down at Phantom Ranch, they get the plants to have the botanical press put on the back of a mule, taken back up, and shipped out to the University of Michigan. Let's see what's next on the slides. Perfect. And they're going to continue down. Now, July 29th, we're getting near the end of our journey. And July 29th is when they pass the space where Bessie and Glennis Hyde's boat was found. And Elzada writes in her journal, "It makes me almost ashamed to enjoy it so much. It is a great river with 100 personalities, but it is not kind." And so they are, again, acutely aware of how lucky they've been of their own trip through that they've made it to this point. Coming up now at the end, we talked about there, you see on the map, Lake Mead, the Boulder Dam, now called the Hoover Dam, had been completed in 1936, and so Lake Mead had been filling for about 2 years. And on Buzz Holmstrom's solo trip, it took him 4 days to row across Lake Mead the year before. Our team, Elzada writes in her journal, as they're passing the last rapids and getting to Lake Mead, she says, "There's a feeling of regret as the last rapids come into view that no more will we have the feeling of uncertainty and expectation, Lake Mead lay placidly ahead. Now you can imagine these boats that had been built for river running and for going through the rapids were not as good at going across a placid lake, right? And so our team thought they were making good time, and they were not. They were going very slowly. And so at the end of their journey, even though our friend Buzz Holmstrom had said, "I'm glad I'm not on that trip," he finally finds a way to put himself on the trip. And he puts his own boat in at Boulder City, and he goes up Lake Mead, finds our team, who's overjoyed to see him, and happy to throw a tow line to his motorboat. He's with the superintendent of Grand Canyon Recreation Area, and they tow them in the last bit to save them from the rowing, for sure.
Which one?
So I think there's one more slide there. Perfect. So on August 2nd, the end of our journey, they have spent 666-ish river miles. It's taken them 43 days. 36 of those days were on the river, so not the days that they had taken little stops at Phantom Ranch and East Ferry. But after 36 days on the river, our team is at Boulder City, Las Vegas area. They're celebrating a little bit. They're getting interviews. They are finally taking a shower again. Lois and Elzada are rooming together at a hotel, and because they're so used to that river life, Elzada has washed her face in a basin, and as a joke, she asked Lois if she wants to use that water before she turns it out. And they recognize the incredible change of river life back to civilization. I think there's another slide. Let's see.
It's
All right. As they're celebrating in that Boulder Canyon or Boulder City area and Las Vegas area, they all, sign each other's stats like little mementos. Yearbook time, it's very cute. And they've all got jobs to do after this, though. And so, while they're actually ended not far off their plan, they have a tight schedule to get back to what they're doing. Norm and Elzada decide to take their road trip, including the south rim of the Grand Canyon, so they can see down where they had been just previously. And it isn't until they get to the south rim of the Grand Canyon, at the top of that Bright Angel Trail, that they find out the plant press had not made it out on tissue. They don't have time to investigate. Elzada leaves instructions for somebody to go find it, but they don't have it, and it's not been shipped back to Michigan. So they continue back to Mexican Hat and back on to the rest of their lives. Our team is back in University of Michigan. Our river runners are getting their gear put back together. And in 1938, Buzz Holmstrom had also planned a second trip of the river run, running the river again. He had done it solo the year before. This year, he wanted to do it solo again, but he was going to take a camera crew, so not quite solo. But on the second trip, he actually is the first non-native man to run each of the rapids. He didn't portage around any of them. He didn't line his boat around. He actually runs through each of them. At the bottom of the Grand Canyon, at Phantom Ranch, one of his camera crew goes up a side canyon and actually finds some cardboard with some paper, with some plants kind of squished together, all wrapped up with rubber bands. Doesn't have any idea what it is. He shows it to Buzz, and because Buzz had spent time with our team, Buzz knew what it was. He arranged for it to get taken back up to the Grand Canyon Rim and sent back to the university. Now, the women take a couple years at the university to go through all of their collection. They are credited with, I think there's another slide. They are credited with finding, for the Western world, 4 brand new species of cactus on this trip. As far as Western Botanical Society understanding, of course, indigenous people have had a connection to the river, have been on the river, have been utilizing the plants and things along the river, and so these plants were well known to the indigenous communities. This is the first time the Western world is cataloging them. The other thing is they have completed the most thorough list of botanical specimens through the Grand Canyon. That is true all the way up through the building of the Glen Canyon Dam and the filling of Lake Powell. So even today, when scientists are looking at what was it like before Lake Powell and Lake Canyon Dam, they're using the list that Lois and Elzada had put together of what specimens of botanical species were through the Canyon there. They published their paper in a couple different places. It takes about 4 years to get all that done. And sometimes they're being asked for interviews, we give lectures, things like that. But mostly it's a little bit under the radar. Lois and Elzada continue their botanical careers. Lois gets her PhD, she gets married, she has a couple kids. Both her and Elzada study these specimens throughout the United States. They both go to Mexico and Guatemala as well. Elzada actually goes to Haiti a couple times to collect specimens. Elzada runs a couple other rivers because she's got hooked on it from this. And later, Elzada becomes a full professor at the University of Michigan. She gets to be a full professor. She actually takes on the botanical gardens there. A lot of her specimens are still there. Lois, after her husband dies, also becomes a professor in botany. And later in life, in her 80s, I believe it was in,
let's see,
in 1994, so recent history, she's invited to run the river again, a part of it. They're going on a scientific trip, and they wanted some old-timers who had seen the river and that system before Lake Powell and the Glen Canyon Dam had been built, and who get a first-hand account of how the ecosystems have changed. And so in 1994, in her 80s, she runs part of that trip again. She takes her matchbook carrier, her match carrier for Buzz, and lives until she's 99. So Lois did not die until 2013. All the way until the end of her life, she had that waterproof match carrier. And she also had her hat that they had taken, kind of their sun hat, cord helmet-ish, looks like a safari hat a little bit. And back in Boulder City, they'd all sign each other's hats like a yearbook. But most of those signatures had faded away by the time she was 99, except for one that was kind of carefully traced over to make sure it wasn't lost. And it was from Buzz. And Buzz had written on Lois's helmet, "To the girl who proved me badly mistaken." I don't know if there's another slide. So in about 43 days, 36 days on the river, an always changing river. In the 30s, a significant change in our culture and our society at the time, opening up doors to what was possible for women, changing the views and the hearts and the minds of people through their bravery, through their scientific knowledge, the change in their own botanical contributions and our understanding of the ecological zones through the Great Canyons is still significant today. And so it's part of why it's such a lovely story to tell. Part of why it's exciting to tell from that Green River overlook, you can picture part of where they went through. But also knowing that the change that they started is still foundational to the things that we're doing today, and the places that we're able to go, and the things that we're able to contribute to, and our understanding of the space that we love so much at Canyonlands, or in Canyon to Old Colorado Basin. That's what I've got. So thanks for sticking around for it. I don't know how we can have time to help, but yes.
They have any of those specimens that they found named for them.
You know what, they did not, which is a different move than other botanical scientists previously. Yeah.
It is. Need this thing out there.
Yeah, for the evening programs or sometimes on the patio. A shorter version, I don't get to all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have time for more Q&A.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, please.
What's your connection to the story? I mean, obviously you was been a part here, you did very well and explained very well, and I've obviously studied it a lot.
Sure.
So I was wondering how do you attach to it?
Yeah, thank you. At Canyonlands, we all do geology programs, and then our other programs are ones that we get to decide what we want to talk about as long as it connects to the park. And there's a lot of great information about John Wesley Powell. We've got a wayside at Reader Available about John Wesley Powell. And I feel like his story's covered pretty well. And so in looking for an adventure story that brought in a new perspective of who else has contributed to the space, led me to actually this article at the top, which is the article that initiated the author of this book to continue writing and turn that article into a book. And so I found a little bit of luck in finding her article and this story in a pretty well-written and complete way that I could adapt parts of it and learn from that. And then actually the author was at the library in Moab last year as her book came out last year. And so getting to meet her and hear her talk about it was really, really cool for me as well. And sometimes I tweeted her that I'm telling other people about her story, which is just kind of. But for me, it's not a great adventure story that connects so many things that I'm passionate about as far as the Colorado River, Canyonlands, scientific community, and contributions of women to that.
So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.
Today, what you learned is something that are surprising or,
Sure. Well, what's interesting in this time, the word ecology had been introduced and used in a couple places, but it wasn't like a widespread understanding. Like the botanical sciences weren't using ecology widely. They had a bunch of other terms for it, zones and areas and complex systems and things. And so what's interesting is the way the women through their journaling and through their collections described ecology of these different zones going down the river. They didn't know quite what they were doing yet. In the sense they didn't know that later we would say, oh, of course, they're talking about the different ecology through here. And so they're trying to connect all those different things without having quite the vocabulary for it that we have now. And so it's interesting to hear or to read what they've said in their own understanding their own journals, and then trying to take that word out of your brain to see why they would have described it that way. But I thought that was pretty interesting as far as how they were viewing that space and using their own scientific knowledge of the time. That's gonna be like how we would do it today.
Jessi, have you had the opportunity yet to go down?
I'm trying to get a work trip to let me go down.
We gotta get T-Berry on that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I've done little stretches of the same, but I have to get down, stretched out, really ski down. It's on the list.
The good was,
yeah. Yeah, so gardening.
One of the other things when I was researching this that I thought was really cool, of course, these are the first non-native groups to do it. So indigenous women have been in the area as a botanical understanding of the area known by indigenous people for a very long time. And the indigenous people are still active in this space. And as I was researching and doing things looking at kind of the contributions and stories to tell from that perspective, harder to find historical ones, but current day, the indigenous women in this space are leading networks of groups on the Colorado River. There's river guides, there's tour companies. There's actually a group that is taking women and indigenous women and flying over different parts of the Colorado River Basin for inspiration and understanding from a different perspective, to look at all sorts of ways they can contribute to the current situation we're in because the governments are. And so the author of this book talks really well about, understanding that just because they're the first non-native women, it's not that they're not the first women to be on the river. But this is the story that we have to tell from that place. Yep.
And so as the lake water levels go down, are they seeing resurgence of some of these plants that have been cataloged?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure about the plant change. I know in Lake Powell, as the river goes down, there are parts of Cataract Canyon that are resurfacing. Some of the rapids that are reconstructing themselves as they kind of flush out the sediment that's covered them before. And actually, there's some indigenous women who are leading part of this kind of mapping of the new Cataract Canyon as it's digging itself out from kind of being buried for a while. So I'm not sure how it's impacted the plant life I know as they do studies looking at an increase of invasive species and all of that is a huge component. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's changed recently what that looks like. Can you go about it?
That'd be interesting.
It would
See the progression and the determining.
Yes, absolutely. And Elzada, she writes that, this, she writes that, in the desert, it's such a unique space of extremes for these plants to be holding on to life, that it's hot and dry, and then all of a sudden it's floods and too much water, and it's somehow in these spaces of extremes, they're still holding on to these cracks and crevices of life. And I think that's part of what kind of has drawn her to these spaces and what is in the extremes that's, holding on to that life there. But yeah. I appreciate you guys. I think I'll hand it off to our partners. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you so much, Jessi, for a wonderful talk. I've listened a lot, and thank you all for being such an attentive and enthusiastic audience. My name is Megan. I run programs here at the Moab Museum. So I'll also give thanks to Steve and the Friends of Arts and Canyonlands for joining us and putting this together. I'll let Steve talk a little bit more to what else is going on in this wonderful series of celebrations for Canyonlands' 60th birthday. But I also want to butt in with a couple upcoming things here at the museum. First of all, if you haven't been here before and you didn't get a chance to poke around as you're coming into the spot, I would encourage you to check out the gallery. On that side, especially, you've got some cool Canyonlands related things. Bates Wilson's hat is up there. To you matters if not, you should go learn about who Bates Wilson is. Wonderful. And then, in terms of events here at the museum, this next upcoming Saturday, the 28th, we'll have the Navajo dancers will be performing at the Arts Fest, and then their leader, Sean Price, will be here at the museum to give a talk about his research, which is really wonderful and really exciting. The dance will be at 12:30 at the Arts Fest, and then 6 o'clock lecture here at the museum. I would also encourage you to join us on October 15th. It's a little far away, but I know you should remember it. At the Grand County Public Library, Heidi Red, legendary cowgirl of the Dugout Branch, will be at the library presenting about her recent book, Cowgirl's Conservation Journey, which is this beautiful. There's so many beautiful photos and stories from her time at the ranch. We also have that on sale here at the museum, but definitely join us for co-hosting that talk at the library. Yeah, I think that's all I've got for right now. Thank you all again for coming. Pass it off to Steve here.
Thanks, Megan. Yes, thank you so much. That was awesome. I won't keep you here too long. My name is Steve Evers. I'm the executive director for the Friends of Arches and Canyonlands. And just a quick show of hands. Who's heard of the Friends of Arches and Canyonlands? Okay, maybe half the room or so. So we're working to change that because we do incredibly important work. We are the official philanthropic partner of the parks here. It's in Southeast Utah Group. And essentially what that means is that we help the park create solutions to the problems that they have. We know the government is a little bit underfunded the parks, right? And we also know that the government moves kind of slow in some situations, so we can help find more efficient solutions. Some of those examples, we purchased a house here in town where we provide housing for Arches seasonal staff. Hot off the press, we just closed on these water rights about a month ago over in the Mays district. Yeah, Patty. We have our former superintendent, Patty, here. Yeah, Patty, we just closed on them. So we're going to get those over to the park, keep those out of the hands of developers because the Mays is built as it should be. We do a handful of other conservation projects. We're very supportive of search and rescue here for Arches and Canyonlands. So we do a host of very needed things for the park. So we're Friends of Arches and Canyonlands. Fun fact, Megan had mentioned Bates Wilson. We started as the Bates Wilson Legacy Fund. So being here, celebrating Canyonlands' 60th anniversary is very special for us. As you may or may not know, Bates Wilson was the driving force here to get Canyonlands designated as a national park. So we're thrilled to continue that legacy. In just a little bit, I think in about a half an hour at 5:30, We're going to have some more festivities just a couple blocks towards Maine at the Moab Information Center. We're going to have a free ice cream social party. Yes, free ice cream, right? And so we'll hang out there. That'll be very casual. And then at 6:30 inside the Moab Information Center, we're going to host a short film that we just produced on our support of Arches and Canyonlands Search and Rescue. And then there'll be some members of the SAR team for a little Q&A. And they're actually going to bring in Rescue One, which is this great big Dodge Ram, I think 5,500. I think the tires will run this big. That we fundraised for to purchase an outfit for a search and rescue team so they could go out for back-to-back incidents and calls because unfortunately they're that busy. They can't come back to base to restock. They have to go out multiple incidents in a row. So anyways, that's going to be out there with the Rangers for some show and tell. If you wanted to go and get a drink or have some food, feel free to do that if ice cream for dinner isn't quite your thing. But at 6:30, we're going to start with that short film and Q&A. So thank you all for being here. Forrest and the Moab Museum team. Megan, thank you all for being here. Jessi, thank you. Thank you all. Oh, okay.